So hi everybody, welcome today to our webinar on ADHD in relationships. So intense, impulsive and love. So this is for anybody that's got ADHD and in a relationship, anybody that's ever looked in the mirror and thought this relationship's a bit of a roller coaster, tends to be there's something to do with ADHD and neurodiversity happening within it. So I'm Katie, I'm the Clinical Services Manager at ADHD Direct, and I'm joined by a fantastic clinical lead, Dr. Georgina Brown. And together we're going to look through emotional intensity, executive dysfunction, awkward but somewhat adorable oversharing, and explore what ADHD can look like in love. So I'll let Dr. Brown introduce herself, just to say hi.
Yeah, hello, I'm Georgina. I'm one of the doctors in the service, ADHD Direct, and also clinical lead for the service. So thanks for coming along this afternoon.
So just to start us off, a few quick ground rules. So this is a safe space, so there's no shame, no blame, and it's a space for self-compassion and real talk. We're not giving anyone any diagnoses today, just naming patterns and giving some tools that might actually make sense for navigating relationships in ADHD. But on a more serious note, we'll have the session split into two sections, one of which will be us going through the presentation, and the second one will be a question and answer section. And you can pop in any questions throughout it in the chat or in the Q&A section, and we can then address these at the end. We've also got our clinical media IT lead, who's Eric, who's got his camera off, and he will help with any kind of general inquiries or any technical issues as we progress through. So what do we mean when we say relationship in ADHD? So I thought it might be helpful to give you a sort of definition from my own dictionary of what I would define relationship as. I'm not taking this from anywhere specifically. So we're referring to any sort of emotional significant connection between adults, whether that's romantic, sexual, platonic, monogamous, polyamorous, queer, or neurodivergent, affirming or undefined. This includes and is not restricted to long-term partnerships or marriage, new or casual dating connections, poly or non-monogamous relationships, and then queer, LGBTQIA+, and gender diverse relationships, committed friendships or chosen family dynamics, any relation structure where emotional safety, intimacy, communication, and mutual care are important. And we honour that many ways people love and connect. ADHD may shape how we experience attention, communication, trust, intimacy, and regulation, but it doesn't limit who we can love and how we define our relationships. And everyone's going to experience these in different ways. So what does ADHD look like? So let's go beyond the checklist and the diagnosis and have some real talk about what ADHD actually means in relationships for people. So we're talking about a nervous system that's wired for intensity, novelty and emotion. Love with ADHD can feel quite exhilarating, creative, playful and deeply connected, but it can also be chaotic, inconsistent and sometimes painful, and often it's all of that in the one day for anybody with ADHD. So from a neuroscience perspective, ADHD affects executive function. So things like planning, remembering, emotional regulation and transitioning between tasks or states can be tricky. So dopamine, which is the brain's motivation and reward chemical, is thought to be lower in those with ADHD. And that's why we see things like hyperfocus early on, where someone's completely immersed in their partner, followed by a sudden drop in attention or responsiveness. It's not about losing interest, it's that their brain shifted stimulation targets, even if the heart hasn't. Then there's emotional regulation. So people with ADHD often experience rejection sensitivity, or RSD, where even small critiques or shifts in tone can feel like deep rejection. That can lead to over-apologising, withdrawal or explosive reactions, and that can also sometimes feel a bit out of proportion, but for that it's very real in the moment for the person experiencing it. From a live perspective side, it's often things like forgetting plans, missing emotional cues or struggling to initiate intimacy, and even when the desire's there. Partners might feel that they're not a priority, while the ADHD partner feels guilty, overwhelmed or ashamed for not getting it right, whatever right may be for that person. We also see common relationship loops, like one partner missing a task, the other expressing frustration, and then a shame spiral leading to conflict and disconnection, and that loop goes on repeat and just keeps repeating unless we do something to kind of name it and interrupt it at that point. So from what we've said, all of that can be difficult parts. It can also bring exciting parts, but more importantly, ADHD can also bring so much to relationships in terms of Passion, presence, humour, depth. People with ADHD often love big and love differently, and that can give a kind of transformative and supportive environment within the relationship. So ADHD and love is a blend of brain science, emotional truth, relational pattern, and it's not worth just saying that it's wrong. Maybe it's just wired a bit differently for some. And we can understand that, then we can start to build on relationships that are healthier, safer, and more connected without asking anyone to change who they are. So let's look at hyperfocus in a bit more detail and view it from two sides of the coin. So the person with ADHD and the person who loves them. So from an ADHD perspective, love can feel all-consuming. In the beginning, there's hyperfocus, your brain's locked on, and you're feeling fully immersed in this major source of dopamine. You've got a flood of motivation, attentiveness and interest, remembering tiny details, planning surprises and prioritising your partner above everything else. Hyperfocus can often be mistaken for obsession, but it's more likely being deeply involuntary pulled towards a rewarding stimulus. The dopamine reward loop reinforces this, so every positive interaction gives a little hit of satisfaction. So you're not pretending or you're not love bombing, your brain's genuinely firing on all cylinders. It's thrilling and it's real because it is real. It might seem confusing for other people, so once people have got that understanding, it becomes a lot better and easier to understand why someone's acting the way they are. But hyperfocus is by nature temporary. ADHD brains are wired for novelty and stimulation. So when things become familiar or routine, the same intensity becomes harder to access, not because you care less, but because the stimulants no longer lights up your brain in the same way. Cue the guilt. So you start to feel deeply, you still care deeply, sorry, but you suddenly forget a birthday or can't keep track of your texts. You're not pulling away. Your brain's just no longer receiving the same chemical cues to stay zeroed in. And then that's when your partner starts to feel hurt. That just adds another layer of shame. So from the partner's perspective, in the early days, it felt magical. You feel seen, you felt adored and prioritised. And then the shift came. Suddenly you're reminding them that you need to respond to you, wondering why your plans have fallen through or why they didn't notice the tone or change in your mood. It can feel like an emotional whiplash, or worse, it can feel like they don't care anymore. But they do. ADHD is not a lack of care, it's a difference in how attention and emotions are managed. So why does it happen? So this dynamic is tied to dopamine regulation within ADHD. So the novelty of new love floods the system, but as routines develop and the novelty fades, the ADHD brain may struggle to maintain consistent attention, not affection. Reframe the process as a bit like when you start that new exciting hobby. You've got all the kit, all the material, you're going to do it, that's it, this is a hobby for the rest of your life. 3 days later, the excitement's plummeted and you're no longer got this excessive drive to engage in it. So it's maybe not to the same magnitude of dropping hobbies in relationships, but it's sometimes easier to reframe it that way to make it a bit easier to understand. So how can we help to kind of support the connection after the firework phase, and then when that's the hyper-focus fades and real life becomes kind of norm and the routines set in? So there's a few simple ways to keep the connection strong. So name the shift together. So talk more openly about the difference between early stage hyperfocus and long-term connection. Say things like, I don't love you any less, my brain's just not in tunnel vision anymore, and that's actually a good thing. Anchor your affection, so create rituals that keep the emotional closeness alive, even when attention naturally drifts. A short daily message, a weekly check-in, or a couple's calendar moment can go a long way. Use reminders without resentment, so shared calendars, so text, nudges, alarms. These aren't signs of failure. They're relationship tools. Think of them as scaffolding for love. Not evidence that anything's broken, but it's about scaffolding your way through it and making sure things work as well as they can between you. Because here's the truth, ADHD and love can feel like a bit like a high-speed, heartfelt road trip, full of spontaneity, intensity, and maybe a few missed exits on the way. The key is to pull over sometimes, refuel, and check the map together so you can stay heading in the same direction. And then remember, any relationship should always be a partnership. It's never a dictatorship. So it's vital that anyone involved is working towards the same end goal, whatever that may be for you. So let's talk about one of the most common and probably one of the most misunderstood things we see in adult ADHD. So emotional dysregulation and its fiery sibling of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or RSD. Now, while emotional dysregulation isn't technically a core diagnostic criteria for ADHD, you'd be hard-pressed to find any clinician who hasn't seen it come crashing through the consultation rooms, a bit like an emotional wrecking ball. In fact, studies suggest that up to about 70% of adults with ADHD experience it. So if it feels familiar, you're very much not alone in experiencing that. So what is emotional dysregulation? Simply put, it's when your emotions escalate quickly, they feel overwhelming and are difficult to soothe. So in the ADHD brain, this happens because the internal communication between the key emotional regulation systems, let's say, is a bit less than ideal. So it's like your amygdala, that's the emotional alarm system, and your prefrontal cortex, the rational brakes, are trying to text each other, but the Wi-Fi's down. A tiny cue, a look, a tone, can we talk later, get picked up by the amygdala like a fire alarm fire. It reacts immediately, so something's wrong, you're unsafe, sound of panic. That's meant to be calmly assessing the situation and talking you off the ledge, but it's stuck in buffering. So you feel things fast, you feel them hard, and often before you've had a chance to make any sense of them. So now sprinkle a bit of dopamine in your system that's not firing consistently, and a norepinephrine network that can't quite keep up with what's going on round about you, and you've got a perfect storm. You've got a brain that's trying to manage big emotions with limited regulation tools. So RSD hasn't just been sensitive to criticism, it's feeling completely gutted by it. It's the emotional equivalent of touching a hot stove, except the stove is someone's raised eyebrow or a mildly delayed reply to your text. Rejection, or even the perception of it, lights up the same parts of the brain as physical pain. So when someone says, we'll talk later, the ADHD brain might hear, you've disappointed me, I'm withdrawn, the love, and that message hits hard. Cue the feeling of, that's it, it's catastrophe, the world's ending round about me, and you can't shake that feeling. So we can then lead on a bit to the shame spiral. So how can the shame spiral that you can see on the left manifest within ADHD? So when someone with ADHD forgets something important, whether that's an appointment, a promise, or a birthday, it's not about the lack of care like we've already looked at, but more from executive functioning challenges. But emotionally, it doesn't always feel that way. So the ADHD partner may instantly spiral into guilt, shame, and over-apologising. They might say sorry a dozen times, catastrophise the mistake, or assume they've irreparably damaged the relationship. This can feel overwhelming for both people or any people involved. The non-ADHD partner may be confused or frustrated, especially if the same issue keeps reoccurring. They may feel that they're carrying more of the emotional or logistical load, which can breed resentment or distance. This is why you sometimes see shutdown after a small comment, over-apologising on loop, spiralling into shame after a single moment of feedback, or the classic, I'm just going to avoid vulnerability entirely, so if I get rejected, so I can't ever be rejected in the first place if I avoid going into any situation. And for the partners without ADHD, it can feel a bit like you're walking on eggshells, wondering why your attempt at an open communication turned into a full-blown meltdown or withdrawal. You're not trying to cause pain, but it lands anyway, and it often lands hard. So clinically, this can show up as emotional responses that are a bit bigger than the moment or what you'd expect in the moment or perceive that could happen. Difficulty for the person calming down once they're upset, fear of being misunderstood, so letting someone down or being seen as too much, whatever too much may be. Still to find out what too much is, nobody's quite told me that yet. And then an avoidance of conversations that might trigger an emotional fallout. And just to be clear, this isn't manipulation or attention seeking or any sort of drama. It's the brain doing what it thinks it needs to do to survive the emotional pain. The good news is understanding the neuroscience helps to take out the shame out of the equation. So emotional dysregulation and RSD are not personality flaws, they're brain-based responses. And once we understand the why, we can start building real intentional tools for regulation, connection and repair. Because in relationships affected by ADHD, we're not aiming for emotional perfection, we're aiming for awareness, flexibility and strategies for work with the brain and not against it. And sometimes when that starts, it's not just noticing what's going on, it's screening, well, this feels big, is it about now or is it about something that happened previously? So having a bit of understanding and stopping and understanding right about you can make it a bit easier for moving forward. So how can we look at managing it? There's good news in terms of we can find tools that we can help with it, although it's all about a lot of compassion. There's nothing we can do there's not a medication that fixes what's going on here. Medication can help, but we need to look at tools and other ways of managing it. Compassion and communication being the main factors that are going to help. So step one, use a pause word. So agreeing on a word or a signal that means let's pause before this escalates. It could be something as simple as a yellow light or something as silly like pineapple. The point is you're saying let's pause, check in, and not let this blow up any further. Step 2, check the narrative. Ask, what story is your brain telling you right now? This question shifts both of you out of reaction mode and into reflection, and it gives space to realise, oh, this isn't about now, this is about feeling not good enough again. And then step 3, soothe before you solve. So before jumping into fixes or logic, offer support. Say, I'm here, you're safe, we'll figure this out. That one sentence can be enough to calm down the nervous system, to let the conversation continue with care and without someone being pushed into panic mode. So step 4, validate before you disagree. So you don't have to agree to validate. You can say that makes sense why you feel that way. That diffuses defensiveness and helps the ADHD partner feel seen and not judged. Step 5, interrupt the loop. So often the ADHD partner will apologise repeatedly, not because they're being dramatic, but because they're trying to manage the rising fear of rejection. Instead of getting stuck in I'm sorry loops, try saying together, well, okay, we can figure this out as a team. That's a grounding and a co-regulating script, and one we clinicians can see can work quite a lot. So something else to try would be something like regulating together. So sometimes the best fix isn't verbal, it's physical. So going for a short walk, matching breathing for a minute, sitting closer, touching if that feels safe. These are nervous system resets, not giving in or letting someone off the hook for doing these things. It's about understanding your partner and moving forward in the best way for the relationship. So from the ADHD partner's perspective, you're not too sensitive. Your nervous system is tuned too fast, intense and emotional responses. The goal isn't to shut them down, it's to understand the pattern and give yourself space before reacting. From the non-ADHD partner's perspective, your words may land with more intensity than you meant. That's not your fault, but being kind, predictable and clear helps create emotional safety and reduces the need for defensive coping moving forward. So emotional dysregulation doesn't mean you're broken. It just means your love might need a little more room to breathe. The goal isn't not to never argue or react. It's to learn how to spot the spiral, slow it down, and find your way back to connection even through the emotional storm. So this one's for anyone that's ever had a fight that started with you forgot the laundry again, and you ended up with someone sleeping on the couch, wondering how it escalated to, do you even love me anymore? So welcome to the ADHD relationship loop, a pattern of communication, unmet expectations and emotional overloads that repeats until one or both partners feel overwhelmed and disconnected. So at the root of many of these conflicts is executive dysfunction, one of the most challenging and misunderstood aspects of ADHD. Executive functionings are the brain's self-management tools. They help us to plan, prioritise, initiate and shift attention and regulate our actions and emotions. When these functions are impaired, it's not about laziness or irresponsibility. It's about the brain genuinely struggling to hold tasks, timelines and motivation in place. For someone with ADHD, remembering to empty the washing machine, pay a bill or follow through or a promise isn't just a matter of effort, it's a matter of brain wiring. So the brain might not register the urgency until the last moment or after. And when something's out of sight, you'll probably know it's completely out of mind. It needs something as a prompt to bring that back. Meanwhile, the partner without ADHD may interpret repeated forgetfulness or unfinished tasks as a lack of care or respect. It feels personal. If you love me, you'd remember. But for the ADHD partner, love and task completion are not linked the same way. Cue the spiral of disappointment, shame, defensiveness and disconnection. So walking through the ADHD relationship loop, as we kind of spoke through there, a pattern that you would find is an ongoing loop until something gets involved or we do something to make it feel easier. So the task gets missed, maybe something like forgetting to send a message or picking something up. The ADHD partner starts to feel frustrated and brings up maybe a reminder, a sigh or a full-blown complaint. The ADHD partner themselves start to feel ashamed, overwhelmed or instantly defensive and either shuts down or reacts emotionally. Both people or anyone involved ends up upset, confused or distant, and nothing gets resolved and the loop starts all over again in this continual cycle. Does that sound familiar? Because it's something that we hear day in, day out in terms of clinician-wise. So if you've got ADHD, how can you spot where you're in the loop or if you're in this loop? Notice if you feel a sudden wave of shame or defensiveness over something that's maybe small. It's often a signal that the executive functioning system's under pressure. If you're the non-ADHD partner, you might notice that you're repeating the same reminders over and over and over and over again, feeling like the household project manager, or just feeling exhausted and less empathetic than you want to. So here's how we start with breaking the loop, not with blame, but with strategy. So shift from blame to system. So instead of why didn't you do this, try what would help to remember this the next time. It's the small changes in collaboration that invite kind of open communication and making it easier to manage and cope moving forward. Use external tools, whether that's alarms, sticky notes, visual checklists, shared calendars. They're not crutches, they're accessibility tools. And as we all know, ADHD is a known disability. So having tools in any aspect of that doesn't make it any less of a relationship or anything. It's about finding the right tools that manage to move forward and make things as easy as possible through all areas of your life. So name the shame. So many adults with ADHD carry a lot of emotional baggage around productivity. A bit of compassion, even saying, hey, I know this isn't about you not caring, can diffuse a lot of the tension within what's going on. Break tasks down. So do the laundry might mean 5 separate executive functionings. So try turning it into steps, like bring the clothes downstairs, sort them, wash them, dry them, fold them. This makes the task feel like it's not a mountain to climb, although in ADHD, the washing probably is a mountain to climb with the amount of clothes that are sitting there most of the time. But I'm only joking from that side. We do understand how difficult it can be and the gripe that it can have in relationships, things like that. But it's important to have humour in these conversations. Otherwise, I think people get a bit on edge with it and can't kind of move forward. So creating weekly check-ins can be helpful. So a 15-minute sync up to review the week, talk about what's coming up, keeping it casual, kind and focused on moving forward and not rehashing on the mistakes. Finally, reframe the story. This isn't about one partner needing to try harder. It's about understanding how ADHD impacts daily life and working together to build that system that works for the both people or any of the people within the relationship. So here's for the vulnerable stuff. So ADHD affects intimacy. Desire can be inconsistent, sensory overload can make physical closeness overwhelming, and shame, many of us carry it like a weighted blanket that we never ever asked for. So let's talk about how it can kind of present. So emotional, physical, and everything in between can be seen as intimacy, and how ADHD can shape the experience of closeness in some beautifully and intense and occasionally frustrating ways. So for many adults with ADHD, intimacy isn't just about physical connection, it's a full body, full brain experience involving sensory sensitivities, emotional energy, and mental focus, depending on the day or even the hour. Intimacy can feel deeply bonding or completely overwhelming. So how does this show up in relationships? You might notice trouble initiating or responding to sexual cues, a libido that feels like it's on a dimmer switch, high one week and nearly gone the next, a burst of intense desire at the beginning of the relationship, thank you hyperfocus, followed by a sudden drop off that feels confusing for everyone involved. Could also be an avoidance of intimacy, not because there's no love, but because of anxiety, overstimulation, or a fear of getting it wrong, or even difficulty staying present during intimate moments because ADHD brain is busy processing too much at once, or has mentally wandered off to the grocery list mid-cuddle. Sorry, I had something popped up my screen and I get totally distracted by it. So why is this happening? ADHD often comes with heightened sensitivity to sound, touch and emotion. That means intimacy can be magical on some days and absolutely not today on others. And add that to executive functioning and shifting from doing mode to feeling mode, from busy brain to soft body can feel like trying to slow a freight train with a feather. And underneath it all, there's often the shame that comes with it. Many adults with ADHD have heard for years that they're too much, not enough, inconsistent, hard to love. So when intimacy gets awkward or dysregulated, they may withdraw, and that connection breeds more shame, which makes reconnection even harder. So for partners, this can feel confusing. One day there's this affection, closeness and desire, and the next day there's distance. It's easy to assume rejection, but in reality, it's about regulation, not rejection. It's about what the nervous system can handle in that moment. So what can we do to help? Create safety before intimacy. So for many with ADHD brains, emotional safety is the door that leads to physical connection. Talk openly about sensory needs. So I prefer soft lighting. Please let me know before you touch me. These aren't mood killers, they're trust builders. And it's important to have these conversations and to be open about them in these sorts of romantic relationships. Redefine what success looks like. So intimacy isn't just about sex. It's laughing while brushing teeth. It's a back rub on the sofa. It's sitting together in silence, prioritising connection over performance. So it's about each individual that's involved in the relationship. It's going to be personal to use and what you are looking for from that relationship. Use transitional rituals, so lighting a candle, playing a song, sitting and breathing together for a few minutes. These gentle cues can help shift the brain from task mode to relationship mode. And laugh. Please laugh, that's the most important thing. Intimacy is human, it's not a movie scene. It can be weird, it can be beautiful, it can be imperfect, and sometimes it can be all of that at once. So it's important to have fun in your relationships as well. Above all, make sure you're leading with compassion, so for yourself and for each other. Intimacy in ADHD relationship doesn't have to look one way to be real. In fact, when it's built on understanding, flexibility and humour, it becomes even more powerful. So let the connection evolve and let it be yours, and it'll be the best way for moving forward. So something I often don't think we talk about enough, it's a difficult conversation for people to have within assessments, appointments, is about impulsivity and dopamine seeking in relationships. For many adults with ADHD, intimacy isn't just about the love and the bonding side, it's also about dopamine. So the ADHD brain craves novelty, intensity and stimulation. In sex, that's kind of the fast lane to all three of them at points, which sounds great in theory, but in practice it can get a bit more complicated. So how can it look? A lot of sexual energy earlier on, big feelings, lots of intensity, followed by emotional or physical withdrawal once that novelty fades. Seeking out stimulation in other ways, whether that's fantasy, flirting, porn, or even emotional affairs, not necessarily out of desire for someone else, but because the brain's looking for a dopamine fix. Acting fast, without thinking it through, especially when under stress, feeling bored or emotionally dysregulated. Now, let's be very clear, this doesn't mean someone's being unfaithful or broken. It means their brain's wired to chase stimulation, especially when they're depleted or unregulated. And that wiring needs understanding, boundaries and support to avoid doing harm. So what helps? So if you're the ADHD partner, checking in with yourself, ask, am I seeking sex for connection or because I'm anxious, overwhelmed or numbing out? Pause before acting. Even just 2 minutes between impulse and action can bring clarity and sometimes provide a better experience in terms of making decisions and having more say on the decisions rather than impulsivity taking over. And then talking openly with your partner about how your brain seeks novelty and can co-create ways to keep intimacy playful, safe and sustainable. So if you're the partner of someone with ADHD, remember impulsivity isn't always personal. It might be dysregulation, not disinterest. Encourage open, shame-free conversations about boundaries, attention and needs. Curiosity is more helpful than judgment is. If trust is impacted, focus on repair and clarity, not blame. Understanding the why helps people heal and grow. And yes, it's okay to laugh about it. ADHD, sex and impulsivity can make for some very memorable moments. Maybe it's impulsively buying a pole and then forgetting you're actually afraid of heights. Maybe you've started seduction in the kitchen and then get distracted halfway through folding dish towels. This is ADHD and it's the things that happen. So laughing about these things can make it easier and more comforting. So if you're in an ADHD relationship, intimacy works best when you're honest, flexible and forgiving. You're not building perfect passion, you're building real connection, one awkward, beautiful moment at a time as you move forward. What about medication then? And when I say medication, I'm talking about ADHD medication here, not meaning any other medication that might be used within relationships. So medication can be helpful for focus, reducing impulsivity and helping regulate mood. But when it comes to relationships and intimacy, the effects can be a little more complex and sometimes confusing. So here's what to know. Taking medication doesn't automatically make someone emotionally available. It can absolutely help someone stay present in a conversation, follow through in tasks or feel less reactive, but it's a tool and it's not the whole toolbox. It doesn't teach communication, vulnerability or relationship repair. So some people feel emotionally grounded when medicated, more able to show up calmly and consistently. Others may notice a flattening of emotions or a reduced sex drive. For some, intimacy improves because anxiety and overwhelm are reduced. For others, the desire for closeness drops, especially during peak dosage periods. So there's also the timing factor. Many ADHD medications wear off in the evening, which is often one time of the day couples have to connect. If the medication's wearing off and emotional regulation is dropping, it can clash with the desire to feel intimate or emotionally available. That mismatch can lead to frustration, misunderstanding, or disconnection. So how can we navigate this? We can chat the patterns together. So notice when connection feels easier or harder. Are there certain times of the days where things go more smoothly or more sideways? Have open conversations. Don't assume your partner knows what's going on internally. Share what feels different for you and ask what they're experiencing too, or what their thoughts are. And then work with your prescriber or your service, whoever that may be. So if you're noticing changes in intimacy, mood, or emotional connection, it's absolutely okay to bring that up. Sometimes small adjustments in timing or dosage can make a big difference for people. And that's not me giving any advice for them to make any changes to their medication. Make sure you discuss that with whoever's prescribing your medication. I'm just saying that it's something to have that discussion with them that can be helpful if appropriate. So the bottom line is medication can support to be more balanced, connected in relationships, but it works best when paired with curiosity, communication, and compassion. It's not a magic fix, but it can help to clear the path for deeper work to happen. So reparenting yourself in a relationship. So some adults with ADHD have had nurturing and validating environments. Others have experienced misunderstandings, inconsistency, or chronic criticism, and many experienced a mix of them. Regardless of your background, most people bring emotional patterns into their ADHD relationship, and those patterns can show up fast and loud when intimacy gets real. So this is when reparenting comes in, not because you were failed, but because you're evolving. Reparenting is about learning to meet your emotional needs with the same care, stability, and kindness you might offer a loved one. So that would be starting to look at the deeper layers of ADHD in relationships, the emotional patterns that come with feeling misunderstood, dismissed, or unsafe, even when no one intends to harm. So the emotional responses can feel amplified. That's because when someone has experienced years of being overlooked or misread by family, teachers, or even past partners, the nervous system learns to brace for disappointment. Fast reactions, people pleasing, or needing constant reassurance are often not drama. They're survival strategies from earlier unmet needs. And the truth is, we all bring patterns into love. But when we learn how to regulate ourselves with compassion, we take the pressure off our partners to fix or hold the emotional weight alone. That makes space for more honest, connected, and resilient relationships. So what does this actually look like? It looks like catching ourselves where our reaction feels bigger than the moment, asking, is this about now? Is this about something else? It looks like giving ourselves permission to say no, to the rest, to ask for clarity, even if we're used to think we had to be easier, low maintenance to be lovable. It looks like learning sometimes for the first time that we don't have to perform calmness or caretaking to deserve care. For both partners, there's a few ways to deepen this or working on it together. So try journaling. What serves me when I feel anxious in love? Reflect what kind of partner do I want to be when I feel safe and regulated? Ask each other what happens or what helps, when you feel emotionally safe. How can I support this? Because healing in a relationship doesn't come from perfection. It comes from self-awareness, communication, and the courage to keep showing up, even when it's messy. You're not behind, you're becoming more of who you've always meant to be, with love that meets you where you are and grows with you moving forward. As I'm sure you'll all be sick of hearing my dulcet tones droning on endlessly for the last 35 minutes, I'm going to pass you over to our fantastic clinical lead, Dr. Georgina Brown, who's going to broach relationships from a slightly different angle, and that from parenting, looking at ADHD, guilt, and growing alongside our children. So thank you.
Yes, so thank you for joining today's session. My presentation's talking about parental love, so the love between a parent and a child. And this is the last part of today's presentation. It'll be a little bit shorter. And what I'm aiming to do is explore perhaps one of the strongest types of love, looking at the relationship between an adult child and the parent, and how this evolves when ADHD is part of the picture and those children grow into adolescence and adulthood. Because parenting is at its core an act of love, but love alone doesn't always provide that understanding, the tools or the language that you need to navigate the complexities that neurodivergence can bring, especially when ADHD goes unrecognized or unsupported in childhood, which, as we know, is very common. So many parents will reflect back on the early years with mixed emotions. They may remember school struggles that didn't make sense at the time, or emotional highs and lows that caused conflict. and confusion, moments where they didn't feel like they could advocate the way that they wanted, not from a lack of love, but from a lack of understanding or support. That love never disappears, but over time, it can become entangled with guilt, grief, and questions about what could have been different. And so this session is about trying to entangle some of that, untangling some of that emotional weight and exploring how parents can move forward by looking back with insight, letting go of blame, and leaning into a renewed connection guided by compassion, communication, and of course, love. So I'm going to go on to my first slide. Okay, so looking back on the early years of parenting can sometimes stir up a mix of emotions, tenderness, regret, and sometimes deep emotional overwhelm. And for many of us, the signs of ADHD were always there. The intense emotional outbursts, the struggles at school, the constant battles over the smallest routines, but we didn't always recognize them for what they were. And we didn't really have the language or the framework at the time. We just knew something felt hard, harder than it seemed to be for others, but we often wondered why and is it me? And these are regrets that many parents carry, a regret that we didn't understand sooner, that we didn't have the right words to explain what was happening, that in meetings with teachers or professionals, we didn't always know how to advocate for our children or for ourselves to have that voice. And we're often caught between doing too much and not enough, too strict or too permissive, and questioning every decision, constantly second guessing, and all the while the emotional toil quietly building up. And many of us were reactive rather than responsive. And not out of carelessness, but because we're operating from a place of exhaustion at times, often overwhelmed, emotionally drained, unsupported. And we didn't always have the tools to regulate our own emotions before then trying to help our children regulate their emotions. And somewhere along the way, we lost space for our own emotional reality. So, as parents, and especially as mothers, I think sometimes there's this quiet expectation to hold it all together, to absorb every meltdown, manage every crisis, and stay composed no matter what. But we were human too, frustrated, scared, sometimes even grieving what we hoped parenting would be when it wasn't. So, no, our reactions weren't just about our children's behavior. They were shaped by layers of internal pressure, confusion, and emotional survival at times. And now, with time and insight, we can begin to see that more clearly and extend our compassion not only to our children, but also to the parents we were back then. And here's where it can become transformative. Because looking back just isn't just about understanding the past. It helps shape how we move forward in our relationships today because our now adult children. Because if we're talking about ADHD and love, there's perhaps no deeper or more complex love than the one between a parent and a child. So we ask ourselves, how does this new understanding help us show up differently? How do we revisit the past without being stuck in it? And how do we begin to repair that trust, even if it's been tested? And perhaps most powerfully, how do our adult children see us now? Do they see someone who tried, who missed things, who perhaps carries that guilt, but who is still here, willing to grow and reconnect? Are they also seeing us with new eyes? Are they recognizing not just our past mistakes, but our continued efforts to understand and do better? And this is at the heart of the work ahead, not about rewriting the past, but about leaning into the present with an honesty, a humility, and also a hope. And also continuing to build a relationship that should be grounded in love and understanding. So when our children become adults, the parenting dynamic shifts, doesn't it? Or at least it should. But if you carry the guilt over the past, it can be hard to know how to move forward. And you may feel unsure of your place. You may wonder if it's too late to repair what was missed. But guilt, when acknowledged and not buried, can become a powerful starting point, not a permanent weight. So, how do we begin to move from guilt to growth? Well, first of all, we need to grieve what needs to be grieved, but don't stay there. And we say this all the time when we're meeting with patients. Yes, things could have been different. Yes, you wish you'd known more. Grieving, that is valid. But the key is not to let guilt freeze the relationship. Your child, now an adult, may also be navigating their own understanding of those years. So let the grief be shared with them, not stuck. And get curious, but not defensive. You know, adult children may bring up painful memories, but try to stay curious, not reactive. So, for example, you could ask them, what was it like for you? Rather than, I didn't mean it like that. Because validating them doesn't mean you agree with every perspective, but it means that you do care how they felt. And then speak the unspoken, something as simple as, I've been thinking a lot about when you were younger, and I realise I miss things. I wish I hadn't. I didn't always understand what you needed, and I want to know. You don't have to have the perfect words, just honest ones. In terms of rebuilding that relationship, it is about rebuilding a relationship, not rebuilding a reputation. So this isn't about you proving you're a good parent. It's about you showing up now in ways that matter. So listening, respecting their autonomy, inviting a connection, and offering consistent care. Because that's what builds trust between adults. And your adult child is now an adult. Try to be emotionally present. Your child doesn't need you to have all the answers. They just need to feel safe being themselves around you. So that means offering a calm, honest, emotionally grounded presence. It's about being a parent without parenting them. So in short, I guess the past may shape the story, but it doesn't have to write the ending. And guilt may be part of the journey, but it doesn't get the last word. The relationship continues, it's still ongoing. And so the healing happens now and onwards. Here's something many parents come to realize, sometimes quite late. They weren't just parenting ADHD, they were living it too. So many parents of children with ADHD are only diagnosed themselves years later, if ever. And until then, they've often been battling this internal chaos silently, unsure why life feels harder, why they can't stay on top of things, why emotional outbursts feel impossible to contain. What happens when both parent and child are experiencing ADHD, but neither of them knows it? Well, it can look a little bit like big emotional reactions on both sides, a constant sense of being disorganized or behind, forgetting important dates or losing track of routines, parenting from a place of guilt or exhaustion. And yet this does often go unspoken. Parents blame themselves. They're labeled inconsistent or disengaged when really they're running on empty, often without even understanding themselves why. So the emotional load can be quite immense. And parents may feel like they're falling short with their child when in fact they're simply trying to they're simply trying to parent without the tools or support they needed for themselves. So what could that mean now? Well, I guess it means we have a new lens. We have a chance to look at the past with more understanding and less judgment. So if you now recognize ADHD in yourself or even suspect it, then insight can shift everything because it allows you to reframe the past, not as a failure, but as a mismatch between capacity that you had and the expectation. If you talk about it, you can share this discovery with your adult child, if it feels right. And in terms of growth, show them that self-awareness is lifelong and healing is possible at any stage. So sometimes naming things brings relief, connection, and even humor, so you can laugh and cry together. So accepting that you were misunderstood even by yourself at the time. And now, still as a parent of your now adult child, you have the opportunity to rebuild a relationship based not on performance, but on honesty. So this is how understanding turns into reconnection. Not every parent-child relationship needs fixing, though. Many remain loving, steady, and supportive, even if the early years were challenging or misunderstood. And even in strong relationships, there's always space to deepen connection, especially as both parent and child evolve and begin to see things with more clarity, more emotional vocabulary, more compassion. And as our children become adults, the relationship changes and ideally it does mature. So this stage is less about guidance and more about that mutual respect, that curiosity, and that emotional presence. So what can we do to strengthen that bond between us and our children? Well, we can lead with openness, not certainty. There's a lot of parents saying, I've been learning about ADHD and how it may have affected us. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because this invites a conversation without assuming that the other person feels or needs it. And be human with them, because our adult children don't need us to have all the answers for them. But they do need and value our honesty. So letting them see you reflect, admit, and grow shows them that love isn't static, it evolves with insight. Honor the life that your child is building. Ask about their experiences with openness, not intrusion. And respect their autonomy, even if you stay emotionally engaged. Connection deepens when we let them define who they are, not just who they were. And share the emotional journey with them, not just the facts, but the journey. If you're discovering things about yourself, like undiagnosed ADHD, or your patterns of reactivity, it's okay to share that, not as a confession, but as a way of saying, I'm still learning too. Let your love that you have for your child become a bit more flexible. As our children grow, our expressions of love, they need to grow too. What they need at 7 isn't the same as what they need at 27 or 47, but they still need us, just in a different, more collaborative way. So this phase of parenting is rich with potential, really, isn't it? Not because we're making up for the past, but because we're continuing the relationship with more awareness, more humility, and more choice. And that's what builds an emotional closeness, not a perfect history, but a present day presence that says, I see you now and I'm here. So at the center of all of this, the reflection, the understanding, the growth is love. And that's what we're here to talk about today, relationships and love. And we don't just parent because we have to. We parent because we love our children deeply, endlessly, and often without quite knowing how to express it, especially as they grow into adults with their own lives, perspectives, and needs. That love doesn't end as they grow, but it does need to evolve. So even when you don't know what to say, you don't have to have the perfect words. A message that says, I'm thinking of you, I'm proud of you, I love you, still matters, perhaps now more than ever. Because adults need reassurance too, especially from their parents. So express love in a language that they understand. Some adult children will value that emotional conversation. Others won't. Others respond to small acts, consistent support, or simply just being included in your life. Find the ways they feel is meaningful to them, not just the ways that feel natural to you. Replace your control with curiosity. Loving someone doesn't mean directing their path. It means caring enough to ask, what does support look like for you right now? So it means offering love that adapts, not love with conditions or expectations. And honor their emotional world and yours. Because adult relationships, and again, you're a parent, but you're now both adults. Adult relationships are built on mutual respect. So that includes respecting those emotional boundaries and giving each other space and showing up without judgment. Because real love is quite calm, isn't it? It listens. It doesn't always need to fix anything. It's just there. Say the things we don't always say. I love you in ways I couldn't always show back then. I'm learning now. Love doesn't have to be loud, but it should be felt. Your love, even imperfect, has power, and it's never too late to let that love evolve into something deeper and more open with your child. So it isn't about perfect parenting, and I know I keep saying that, but it really isn't. It's about a real connection, and the kind built not on control, but just on presence. not an authority, but a real affection and just being there. So you won't have all the answers, but you should just be willing to walk alongside, because it's about showing up. It's how we listen and how we keep choosing that connection. And love isn't just something that we feel, it's something we choose to show again and again. And in the end, love isn't just about words, is it? It's about that presence, that care, that consistency. So we touched on emotional regulation earlier on in Katie's talk. One of the most powerful shifts we can make in relationships, especially with our adult children, is learning how to stay regulated, even when emotions run high. And this is not always easy. Conversations about the past, about ADHD, or even everyday misunderstandings can quickly stir old patterns up: frustration, defensiveness, guilt, overwhelm, arguing. But emotional regulation is the glue that holds a respectful connection together. And in adult relationships, how we respond matters far more than what we say. So, a few principles just to think of. Respond, don't react. It sounds obvious, but when something triggers us, the instinct is to defend, correct, or fix it, isn't it? But emotional maturity, especially in parenting an adult, means taking a breath and responding with intention, not impulsivity. Always pause before you problem solve. Sometimes our adult children just need to be heard. We don't need to rescue or jump into action. A simple, that sounds really hard. Do you want me to help solve the problem, or do you want me to just listen? That can change the entire tone of a conversation. Also, validate them first and then engage with them. So validation doesn't mean you agree. It just means you understand their feelings are real. So you could say something like, I can see how much that made you feel unseen. And that goes a lot further than that's not what I meant. Okay. Emotional boundaries are an act of love. You're allowed to say, I want to keep this conversation going, but I need a moment to regulate myself first. You're okay to take a breath. This model, healthy emotional management, it shows that connections matters enough to take care of it properly. Regulate yourself and not their emotions. You don't have to calm them down. You don't have to fix their mood. Your job is to bring your calm to the situation, not to go chasing theirs. That's the kind of emotional safety that will build trust over time. Emotional regulation, it's not about being perfect. It's about creating that space for a connection that feels safe for both of you, that feels honest and is respectful. And when we do that consistently, even tricky conversations can become opportunities for a deeper trust and not tension. And the more we practice it, the more natural it becomes, not just as a skill, but as a way of expressing love through presence. So here we are at the end of the journey through reflection, emotion, insight, and above all, love. But there was one message I guess I'd like to leave with you, and that's we did the best we could with what we knew at the time. And that deserves some compassion. Because as parents, especially those navigating ADHD in our families, we carried so much confusion, guilt, hope, frustration, a fierce love, defending our children. And often, and people don't talk about it, but often a deep loneliness along that journey. We tried, we really stretched ourselves, but we stayed there. And even when we didn't get it right, our hearts were in the right place. So now that we've got a clear understanding and perhaps a kinder lens on ourselves, we have a really powerful opportunity to not only look back with less judgment, but to move forward with a greater intention. So we can ask ourselves, how can I show my love now in ways that matter to them? What kind of relationship do I want to build starting today? And how do I continue to offer that warmth, that honesty and presence, even if the words don't come easily? Because love's not just about the history of what happened. It's about attention, awareness, and the action in the present. So whether it's a shared laugh or a text, a small shift in how you listen or communicate with your child, every choice we make now is going to help strengthen the foundation of the relationship as it continues to grow. Because our stories may not be imperfect, and many of ours aren't, but they are full of heart. And there's always more love to give, isn't there? In a new, better understood, and, just in a different way. So I guess, again, just to reiterate that we may not have the answers, but we choose to stay connected. And that's the good step. To stay curious and to keep building the relationship shaped by the honesty that we have and love for our relationship to continue and evolve with our children. So thank you for joining the webinar today. And I think if it's one thing I hope you take away, it's that you're not alone. That so many parents carry this quiet guilt of unanswered questions and a longing to do things differently, even now, even after the fact. But parenting isn't about being perfect, it's about being present, especially when you now know better and can start to begin to build again if you did get it wrong. So wherever you are in the journey with your adult children or with yourself, it's never too late to show up for them.